Some objects tell time. Others tell the truth. The room fell silent the moment the elderly watch expert adjusted his glasses and stared at the timepiece resting beneath the auction hall lights. For several seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. Then he whispered words that sent a ripple through the crowd. That watch belongs in a museum. More than 200 guests filled the ballroom of the Whitmore Heritage Auction in downtown Manhattan. Collectors, investors, journalists, people who spent more on watches than most families spend on homes. Yet every eye was fixed on the same object. A silver Swiss watch with a worn leather strap. Nothing flashy. Nothing covered in diamonds. It looked almost ordinary. And beside it stood Claire Bennett, 28 years old. White apron. Black service shoes. A waitress who looked completely out of place among millionaires and collectors wearing tailored suits. Her hands tightened around each other as whispers spread through the room. That's her. The waitress. The liar. Claire lowered her eyes. She had heard those words before. Too many times. Across the room, Alexander Hayes watched from the front row. The billionaire entrepreneur sat perfectly still, one arm resting on the polished chair beside him. 3 days earlier, he would have laughed at the entire situation. 3 days earlier, he had been one of the people convinced Claire Bennett had invented an impossible story. Now he wasn't so sure. The watch expert carefully lifted the silver timepiece. His hands trembled. Not from age. From disbelief. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. Claire swallowed. The answer was simple. But every time she told it, people laughed. Every single time. She looked toward the crowd. Toward the faces already preparing to doubt her again. Then she spoke. "An old man gave it to me." A few people smirked immediately. Others exchanged knowing looks. The expert didn't smile. He didn't laugh. Instead, he slowly turned the watch over. His expression changed. Something hidden beneath the case caught his attention. Something no one else had noticed. The ballroom grew quieter. Somewhere in the back, a champagne glass gently touched a table. The sound echoed through the silence. Claire felt her heartbeat quicken. For months, she had carried the weight of disbelief. For months, she had watched strangers dismiss her with a glance. Not because of what she said, because of who she was. A waitress. A woman serving coffee and carrying trays. The kind of person wealthy people rarely looked at twice. Yet now the same people leaned forward in their seats. Waiting. Watching. The expert looked up slowly. His face had gone pale. "This changes everything," he said. Across the room, Alexander Hayes felt a chill run through him. Because for the first time, he realized Claire Bennett might have been telling the truth all along. And if she was telling the truth, then everyone in that room, including him, owed her more than an apology. They owed her an explanation. 3 days earlier, none of this had existed. No auction, no experts, no stunned silence. Just a busy restaurant in Midtown Manhattan. A waitress carrying coffee, and a watch that nobody believed could possibly be real. 3 days earlier, Manhattan was wrapped in the soft gray light of a late autumn morning. The streets glistened from a night of rain, and cold winds swept between the glass towers of Midtown. Inside Hawthorne House, one of the city's most prestigious restaurants, the scent of fresh coffee drifted through the dining room as employees prepared for the lunch rush. Claire Bennett moved quietly between tables, straightening silverware and aligning water glasses with practiced precision. She had worked there for nearly 3 years. Most customers never remembered her name. They remembered the coffee arriving exactly when they needed it. They remembered the calm smile. They remembered the feeling that somehow everything was handled before they even asked. Claire preferred it that way. Invisible people attracted fewer problems. At 28, she lived alone in a small apartment 30 minutes away by subway. Her life was simple. Work, home, books borrowed from the public library, the occasional call with her older sister in Connecticut. Nothing about her appeared extraordinary. At least, that was what people assumed. The silver watch rested beneath the cuff of her uniform sleeve as it always did. The leather strap had softened with age. The polished case carried tiny scratches that reflected years of use. Most people never noticed it. Those who did usually assumed it was inexpensive. Claire never corrected them. She never explained where it came from. Experience had taught her that some stories were easier to keep private. The lunch crowd began arriving shortly after 11:30. Executives filled corner booths. Lawyers reviewed documents over espresso. Tourists photographed the crystal chandeliers hanging above the dining room. Everything followed its usual rhythm until the front doors opened and Alexander Hayes stepped inside. Conversations subtly shifted. Heads turned. Even those pretending not to recognize him glanced twice. Alexander was one of the most recognizable business figures in America. 42 years old. Founder of a technology empire worth billions. A man whose interviews appeared on television almost weekly. He carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Yet there was something else beneath the polished image. A certain distance. As though success had built invisible walls around him. Claire noticed him immediately. Not because he was famous. Because famous people always created extra work. She picked up a menu and approached his table near the window. "Good afternoon, sir," she said warmly. "Welcome to Hawthorne House." Alexander glanced up briefly. His attention remained fixed on the messages appearing across his phone screen. "Coffee, black, and whatever the chef recommends." Claire nodded. "Of course." She turned to leave when something unexpected happened. Alexander's gaze dropped to her wrist. Just for a second, but long enough. His eyes narrowed slightly. The watch had slipped from beneath her sleeve while she reached for the menu. Claire gently adjusted the cuff and continued toward the kitchen. Behind her, Alexander remained seated. Yet he was no longer reading his messages. Instead, he found himself thinking about a silver watch that looked strangely familiar. And for reasons he could not explain, he could not stop looking at it. Alexander Hayes had built an empire by noticing details other people overlooked. A misplaced number inside a financial report. A single sentence buried in a contract. A hesitation in someone's voice during a negotiation. Details created fortunes. Details prevented disasters. That was why the watch continued to bother him long after his coffee arrived. Claire moved through the restaurant with quiet efficiency. She greeted customers, delivered meals, refilled glasses. Yet every few minutes Alexander found his attention drifting back toward the silver watch hidden beneath her sleeve. It was familiar. Not the exact watch perhaps, but something about its shape, its proportions, the distinctive curve of the case. He had seen it somewhere before. The thought lingered in the back of his mind like a melody he could not fully remember. After several meetings and countless emails, he finally pushed his plate away and signaled for the check. Claire approached carrying a leather folder. "I hope everything was satisfactory today," she said with her usual calm smile. Alexander nodded. Then his eyes dropped toward her wrist again. This time he spoke before thinking. "That is an interesting watch." Claire glanced down briefly. A faint expression crossed her face. Not surprise. Not pride. Something quieter. "Thank you." Alexander waited. Most people would have immediately explained where an unusual watch came from. They would have mentioned a brand name, a price, a family story. Claire said nothing more. The silence intrigued him. "Is it Swiss?" he asked. For the first time, she hesitated. Only for a second. "I believe so." Alexander leaned back slightly. "You believe so?" A customer at a nearby table laughed softly. "Maybe she bought it online," the man joked. Claire did not react. She simply handed Alexander the check. "Have a wonderful afternoon, Mr. Hayes." The conversation should have ended there. But something about her answer remained with him. "I believe so." Not yes. Not no. As though the watch mattered for reasons she preferred not to discuss. Across the dining room, another server approached Claire as she returned toward the service station. Alexander could not hear everything they said. Only fragments carried through the restaurant noise. "That old watch again. People keep asking. You should just tell them." Claire shook her head gently. The other server laughed and walked away. A few minutes later, Alexander signed the receipt and prepared to leave. As he stood, he noticed something unexpected. Claire had removed the watch while washing her hands near the employee station. For several seconds it rested alone on the counter beneath the bright overhead lights. The silver case reflected a sharp beam across the room. Alexander froze. Suddenly he remembered where he had seen that design before. Years ago, at a private exhibition in Geneva. An exhibition featuring some of the rarest timepieces ever created. His pulse quickened. The resemblance was impossible. Ridiculous even. Yet the memory refused to disappear. Before Claire returned, he took one final look. Then he walked toward the exit carrying a question that would soon change far more than either of them could imagine. The memory stayed with Alexander throughout the rest of the day. During meetings, during conference calls, even during a dinner with investors overlooking the Hudson River, his mind kept returning to the same image. a silver watch resting beneath bright restaurant lights. By midnight, curiosity had replaced distraction. Sitting alone in his penthouse office, he opened a secure database containing photographs from private auctions and collector exhibitions around the world. Thousands of watches appeared across his screen. Rare chronographs, limited editions, historical pieces owned by royalty and industrial giants. One after another, he searched. The city lights shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows while hours slipped past unnoticed. Then, shortly after 1 in the morning, he found it. Not the exact watch. Something older. A prototype. The resemblance was undeniable. Alexander leaned closer. The design originated from the Whitmore collection, one of the most respected names in Swiss watchmaking history. Yet according to the records, only a handful had ever existed. Most were locked inside private collections worth millions of dollars. None should have been sitting on the wrist of a waitress serving coffee in Manhattan. He stared at the photograph. The same curve of the case. The same subtle crown design. The same unusual markings near the edge of the dial. His instincts immediately raised two possibilities. Either Claire possessed an extraordinarily convincing replica, or something about her story was far more complicated than it appeared. The next morning, Hawthorne House buzzed with its usual energy. Plates clinked softly. Fresh pastries emerged from the kitchen. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows. Claire arrived 15 minutes early, as she always did. She tied her apron, greeted co-workers, and prepared for another ordinary shift. What she did not know was that several people had already begun talking about her watch. Word traveled quickly in places where wealthy clients gathered. A customer who recognized the design mentioned it to another customer. That customer told a friend. By lunchtime, speculation had become entertainment. I heard it is worth $500,000. No chance. Maybe it was inherited. Or maybe the story changes every time someone asks. The comments drifted through the restaurant like invisible smoke. Claire heard some of them. She ignored all of them. Years earlier, she might have tried to explain. Now she simply focused on her work. The less attention she attracted, the easier life became. Around noon, one of the managers approached her near the service station. His name was Daniel Mercer, a man known for caring deeply about appearances. "Claire," he said, lowering his voice. "A few guests have questions about that watch." She looked up calmly. "Questions? Stories are circulating." Daniel forced a polite smile. "Maybe it would help if you clarified where it came from." Claire paused. Her fingers rested lightly against the coffee tray she was carrying. The familiar weight of the watch pressed gently against her wrist. "I tell the truth whenever someone asks," she replied. Daniel's smile faded slightly. "The problem is that not everyone believes it." Claire nodded once, neither surprised nor offended. Then she returned to her tables. Behind her, Daniel watched with growing concern. Because in a restaurant built on reputation, rumors had a way of becoming something much bigger. And this particular rumor was only beginning. By Thursday afternoon, the rumors had grown larger than the watch itself. Customers arrived already knowing fragments of the story. Some claimed Claire had inherited the timepiece from European royalty. Others insisted she had purchased a counterfeit version online and invented a dramatic history to make it seem authentic. Each retelling became more exaggerated than the last. Claire listened to none of them. She carried coffee, delivered meals, smiled politely. The watch remained hidden beneath her sleeve. Yet the attention followed her everywhere. A pair of businessmen asked to see it during lunch. A collector offered to buy it on the spot for $10,000. Another customer laughed openly when Claire declined. "That is because she knows it is fake," the man said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Several people chuckled. Claire simply thanked them for dining at Hawthorne House and continued serving the next table. Her composure somehow irritated people even more. They wanted an argument. They wanted a reaction. Instead, they received silence. Late that afternoon, Daniel Mercer finally decided to address the situation directly. He called Claire into a small office behind the dining room. The walls were decorated with framed photographs of celebrity guests who had visited over the years. Through the glass door, the sounds of the restaurant continued in the distance. Daniel folded his hands across the desk. "Claire, we need to talk." She sat calmly across from him. "Of course." Daniel exhaled slowly. "This watch situation is becoming a distraction." Claire nodded. "I understand. Then maybe you should explain exactly where it came from." For a moment, neither spoke. The ticking clock mounted above the door seemed unusually loud. Finally, Claire answered. An elderly man gave it to me several years ago. Daniel looked unconvinced. And according to the story people keep repeating, this mysterious stranger handed you a rare Swiss watch worth a fortune? I never said it was worth a fortune. But you expect people to believe the rest. His voice remained professional, but skepticism lingered beneath every word. Claire lowered her eyes briefly. Not in shame, simply in patience. I only tell people what happened. Daniel leaned back in his chair. You realize why people find it difficult to believe. Yes. And yet you keep telling the same story. Claire looked up. Her expression never changed. Because it is the truth. Daniel stared at her for several seconds. Then he shook his head. You are a good employee, Claire. One of the best. But sometimes the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Claire said nothing. The meeting ended a few minutes later. When she stepped back into the dining room, the evening crowd had begun arriving. Soft music drifted through the restaurant. Candlelight reflected against polished glass. Everything appeared normal. Yet as Claire passed several tables, conversations suddenly stopped. Eyes followed her. Smiles appeared. Some sympathetic. Some amused. Some openly doubtful. She felt every one of them. Still, she continued walking. The silver watch rested quietly against her wrist. Unchanged. Unbothered. Waiting. And somewhere across Manhattan, Alexander Hayes was making a phone call that would soon bring a genuine Swiss watch expert into the middle of a story that almost no one believed. The call lasted less than 4 minutes. That was all Alexander Hayes needed. By the time he ended the conversation, an invitation had already been sent to one of the most respected watch historians in North America. His name was Leonard Fisher, a quiet man whose opinions carried enormous weight among collectors. If Leonard declared a watch authentic, few people argued. If he declared it fake, its value vanished instantly. Alexander stared out at the Manhattan skyline after hanging up. Part of him expected the expert to confirm what everyone else already believed. A convincing imitation. An exaggerated story. A misunderstanding that had somehow spiraled into gossip. Yet another part of him remained unsettled. He remembered Claire's expression every time someone questioned her. No defensiveness. No elaborate explanations. No attempt to persuade anyone. Only calm certainty. It was not the behavior he expected from someone inventing a story. The following afternoon, Hawthorne House prepared for one of its busiest evenings of the season. A private networking event had filled nearly every reservation slot. Investors, executives, attorneys, and collectors crowded the dining room. Crystal glasses reflected warm golden light. Soft piano music drifted through the air. Claire moved through the room carrying a tray of coffee cups while conversations rose and fell around her. Most guests ignored her. Some did not. Near the center of the dining room, a group of collectors had gathered around a table discussing vintage watches. One of them noticed the silver case beneath Claire's sleeve. The man smiled knowingly. There it is again. Another guest laughed. The famous mystery watch. A third shook his head. I heard the story. An old stranger hands over a rare Swiss masterpiece and disappears. Sounds like a movie. Several people chuckled. Claire set down the coffee cups one by one. Her hands remained steady. Would anyone like cream? She asked politely. The question seemed to disappoint them. They wanted debate. Instead, they received professionalism. Across the room, Daniel Mercer noticed the exchange and frowned. The attention was becoming impossible to ignore. Every day, more customers asked about the watch. Every day, more rumors appeared. Hawthorne House had built its reputation on elegance and discretion. Public spectacles were bad for business. As Claire walked toward the kitchen, Daniel intercepted her. Leonard Fisher is coming tonight, he said quietly. Claire stopped. The watch expert? Daniel nodded. Mr. Hayes arranged it. For the first time in days, a small flicker of surprise crossed her face. Then it disappeared. I see. Daniel studied her carefully. Does that concern you? Claire looked down at the watch resting against her wrist. The leather strap had darkened with age. The silver case carried memories no one else could see. No, she answered softly. The truth does not change because someone examines it. Daniel had no response to that. An hour later, the restaurant doors opened once again. A distinguished gray-haired man stepped inside carrying a leather briefcase. Conversations began to slow. Heads turned. The expert had arrived. And without realizing it, Nearly everyone in the room was about to become part of a story much larger than a watch. Leonard Fisher did not look like a man capable of changing the atmosphere of an entire room. He was 71 years old, modestly dressed, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses that seemed almost too ordinary for someone whose opinions influenced collectors across continents. Yet the moment he entered Hawthorne House, conversations softened. People recognized him, people respected him, and people trusted his judgment. Claire noticed him immediately, not because of his reputation, because he carried himself the same way another man once had. Quietly, without demanding attention, Leonard greeted Alexander Hayes with a brief handshake before accepting a seat near the center of the dining room. Several guests subtly repositioned themselves closer. Curiosity spread faster than the scent of fresh coffee. Everyone knew why he was there, even those pretending otherwise. Claire continued working. Table 12 requested dessert menus. Table 7 needed another bottle of sparkling water. A family near the window asked for recommendations. She focused on each task with practiced calm. But beneath her sleeve, she felt the familiar weight of the watch. And with it came memories. Rain, cold wind, a train station, a stranger sitting alone. 5 years earlier, she had been 23 and struggling through one of the hardest periods of her life. Her father had passed away the previous winter. Medical bills had emptied what little savings the family possessed. Claire worked 2 jobs while taking evening classes and trying to hold everything together. Most days felt like survival. One November evening, heavy rain swept across the city. Commuters rushed through Grand Central Terminal beneath umbrellas and dripping coats. Everyone seemed focused on reaching somewhere else. Everyone except one elderly man sitting quietly on a bench near track 31. Claire noticed him because he looked lost. Not confused exactly, just alone, completely alone. She bought herself a cup of coffee from a nearby kiosk and almost continued walking. Almost. Then she stopped. Something about him reminded her of her father. The same tired eyes, the same thoughtful silence. So she approached. "Sir, are you all right?" she had asked. The man looked up slowly. His smile was gentle. "I am," he replied. "I am simply waiting." Claire offered him the extra coffee she had purchased by mistake. At least that was the excuse she used. The old man accepted gratefully. They talked for nearly an hour. Nothing extraordinary. Weather, books, travel, life. He asked questions few people asked anymore. Questions that required thought instead of quick answers. When her train was finally announced, she stood to leave. She assumed she would never see him again. Most encounters in New York ended that way. Strangers crossing paths before disappearing forever. Yet as she gathered her bag, the man stopped her. "Miss Bennet," he said, "kindness is becoming rare." Claire smiled awkwardly. It was only coffee. The old man shook his head. No, it was attention. Most people no longer give that away. Back in the present, Claire carefully placed a dessert plate on a customer's table. Across the room, Leonard Fisher was speaking quietly with Alexander Hayes. The expert occasionally glanced toward her wrist, toward the watch, toward a story no one yet understood. And Claire suddenly wondered if tonight would finally reveal why that rainy evening had never truly left her life. The memory unfolded with remarkable clarity. Claire could still hear the distant announcements echoing through Grand Central Terminal. Still see rain sliding down the enormous windows beyond the platforms. The elderly man had remained seated for several moments after she stood to leave. Then, just as she adjusted her shoulder bag, he reached inside his coat pocket and removed a small leather case. It was worn from years of use. The edges were softened. The color had faded. "Take this," he said. Claire blinked in confusion. "I cannot accept that." The man smiled. "You have not even looked at it." "That is exactly why I cannot accept it." His smile widened. "Then look." Reluctantly, Claire opened the case. Inside rested the silver watch. Even then, she knew it was beautiful. The polished metal reflected the station lights. The craftsmanship felt different from anything she had seen before. Not flashy, not expensive-looking in the obvious way, just precise, thoughtful, timeless. She immediately tried to hand it back. "Sir, this is far too valuable." The old man gently closed her fingers around the case. "Keep it." "Why?" For a moment, he simply studied her face. The noise of the station seemed to fade into the background. Travelers hurried past. Trains arrived and departed. Yet the conversation felt strangely still. "Because one day," he said quietly, It may remind you of something important. Claire laughed softly. A watch tells time. Not always. The man glanced toward the silver case. Sometimes it tells a story. She shook her head. I cannot accept a gift like this from someone I just met. Then consider it a thank you. For coffee. For seeing me. His answer caught her off guard. The old man looked away briefly, watching people rush through the terminal. Most people look past one another now. They see titles. They see money. They see appearances. Very few see people. Claire did not know how to respond. The sincerity in his voice made it impossible to dismiss. Finally, after several moments, she carefully placed the watch back into its case. If I take this, she said, I will feel obligated to return it someday. The man smiled again. Then perhaps our paths will cross again. But they never did. The next morning Claire returned to Grand Central at the same time, half expecting to find him there. The bench sat empty. She checked again the following week. Still empty. Months passed. Then years. The old man seemed to vanish as completely as he had appeared. Back in the restaurant, Claire adjusted a table, setting while remembering the final words he had spoken before she boarded her train. At the time they had sounded almost meaningless. Yet they stayed with her. When the day comes, he had said, trust the watch. Across the dining room, Leonard Fisher finally rose from his chair. The watch expert slowly approached Claire's station. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. Even Daniel Mercer stopped what he was doing. Leonard's eyes settled on the silver watch beneath Claire's sleeve. Then he asked a question no one else had thought to ask. Miss Bennett, he said softly, did the man who gave you this ever tell you his name? Claire looked at him for a long moment. Then she answered, no, he never did. And for the first time that evening, genuine astonishment appeared on Leonard Fisher's face. For several seconds, Leonard Fisher said nothing. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath along with him. Claire stood quietly beside the service station while dozens of eyes shifted between her and the renowned expert. Alexander Hayes watched from across the room, his attention fixed on Leonard's expression. It was not skepticism. It was recognition, the kind that appears when a missing piece suddenly falls into place. Leonard extended his hand politely. May I see it? Claire unfastened the watch and placed it carefully into his palm. The silver case caught the warm restaurant lighting. Leonard removed a small magnifying lens from his pocket and examined the watch with extraordinary care. He studied the dial, the crown, the case edges, every tiny detail. Minutes passed. Conversations faded into whispers. Finally, Leonard looked up. This is not a replica. A murmur swept through the dining room. Several collectors exchanged startled glances. One man nearly dropped the menu he had been holding. Daniel Mercer felt his stomach tighten. Leonard continued examining the watch. In fact, this piece contains features that counterfeit manufacturers would never know existed. The room grew even quieter. Claire remained still. Her expression did not change. Leonard carefully turned the watch over. Then he pointed to a nearly invisible engraving hidden along the edge of the case. Do you see this? He asked. Alexander stepped closer. The engraving was so small it was almost impossible to notice without magnification. A sequence of tiny markings curved along the metal. Leonard smiled faintly. This signature was used only during a brief experimental period nearly 20 years ago. One of the collectors frowned. How rare are we talking? Leonard looked at him. Extremely rare. The answer landed heavily. Several people glanced back toward Claire. The same waitress many of them had quietly dismissed now stood at the center of a conversation they no longer controlled. Leonard studied the watch again. Then something unusual caught his attention. His eyebrows rose. He rotated the crown slightly and listened. A soft click echoed from inside the mechanism. Tiny, precise, deliberate. Leonard froze. Interesting. Alexander stepped closer. What is it? Leonard did not answer immediately. Instead, he examined the watch from another angle. Then another. His fingers moved with increasing care. Finally, he looked directly at Claire. Miss Bennett, has anyone ever serviced this watch? Claire shook her head. Not that I know of. Has anyone ever opened it? No. Leonard slowly exhaled. The expression on his face had changed again. This time it was not recognition. It was astonishment. Then there is something you need to know. Every sound in the restaurant seemed to disappear. Even the piano player had stopped. Leonard gently held up the watch. This model should not contain an internal release mechanism. A collector stared in disbelief. What does that mean? Leonard's gaze remained fixed on the silver case. It means someone modified it. Alexander felt a chill travel through him. Claire looked down at the watch she had carried for 5 years. The watch she thought she understood. The watch she had trusted without question. Leonard's voice dropped almost to a whisper. And whoever modified it wanted something hidden inside. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silver watch rested in Leonard Fisher's hands as though it had suddenly become the most important object in Manhattan. Claire felt her pulse quicken. Around her, customers leaned forward in their seats. Waiters paused in the middle of carrying trays. Even Daniel Mercer had forgotten about the evening's reservations. Every eye remained fixed on the watch. Leonard carefully adjusted his glasses. "I need a better light." Alexander immediately signaled toward the private dining area. Within minutes, a small table had been cleared near one of the crystal chandeliers. Leonard sat down beneath the brighter light while the others gathered around him. The atmosphere no longer felt like a restaurant. It felt like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. Leonard placed the watch on a folded white cloth. Then he examined the edge of the case once more. His fingers moved with remarkable precision. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he rotated the crown 3 times. A soft click echoed through the silence. Then another. Claire watched closely. She had worn the watch every day for 5 years. Yet she had never heard that sound before. Leonard stopped moving. "There." Alexander frowned. "What happened?" Leonard pointed toward a nearly invisible seam running along the side of the case. That was not there before. Several collectors stepped closer. The seam was so thin it could easily have been mistaken for part of the original design. Leonard pressed gently against the metal. Nothing happened. He adjusted his grip and tried again. Still nothing. Then he smiled. Whoever built this was a genius. The statement sent another wave of whispers through the room. Leonard turned the watch upside down and pressed a tiny engraved symbol near the base. The mechanism responded instantly. A hidden compartment no larger than a postage stamp slowly revealed itself inside the case. Gasps spread through the crowd. Daniel Mercer stared in disbelief. One of the collectors actually removed his glasses and cleaned them, convinced he must be seeing things incorrectly. Claire stood frozen. The watch she thought she understood suddenly felt unfamiliar. Leonard carefully reached inside the compartment. Something was hidden there. Something folded. Something protected from time itself. His hands became even more cautious. "Paper," he whispered. Alexander blinked. "There is paper inside." Leonard nodded. Very old paper. The hidden item was no larger than a business card when folded. Delicate. Fragile. Protected inside the watch for years. Perhaps decades. Nobody dared interrupt. Leonard slowly unfolded the tiny document. The paper had yellowed with age, yet the writing remained visible. He stared at it. Once. Twice. Then his expression changed completely. Astonishment. Recognition. Something deeper. The room waited. Claire felt her throat tighten. "What does it say?" she finally asked. Leonard looked up from the paper. His eyes settled on her face. For several seconds, he seemed unable to speak. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Miss Bennett, I believe this message was left specifically for you." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had come before. Leonard Fisher carefully unfolded the fragile paper the rest of the way. The yellowed edges trembled slightly beneath the chandelier light. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. The entire room had narrowed to a single sheet of paper hidden inside a watch for years. Leonard adjusted his glasses and began reading silently. The astonishment on his face deepened with every line. Alexander Hayes stepped closer. "What does it say?" Leonard looked at him, but did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned toward Claire. "You should hear this first." Claire felt the eyes of the room settle upon her. She nodded once. Leonard lowered his gaze back to the document. Then he began to read aloud. "To the young woman who offered me coffee when she had little herself. If you are reading this, then time has done what it always does. It has revealed character." The room remained silent. Leonard continued. "Many people admire success. Very few respect kindness. Fewer still practice it when nobody is watching." Claire felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. The words sounded familiar. Not because she had heard them before, but because they carried the same calm wisdom she remembered from the old man at the train station. Leonard continued reading. "The watch you carry was created as a reminder. Not of wealth, not of status, but of attention. You stopped when others hurried past. You listened when others ignored. Never underestimate the value of that gift. Several people lowered their eyes. Daniel Mercer stared at the floor. A few of the collectors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Leonard reached the final section and paused. Then he read the signature. With gratitude, William Whitmore. The name landed like a thunderclap. Audible gasps spread across the dining room. One collector nearly dropped his wine glass. Another covered his mouth in disbelief. Alexander felt his pulse accelerate. William Whitmore was not merely a watchmaker. He was a legend, the founder of the Whitmore Collection, a genius whose designs transformed the industry, a man who had disappeared from public life years before his death. Leonard slowly lowered the paper. This cannot be overstated, he said quietly. William Whitmore personally wrote this message. Claire blinked. The man at the station was William Whitmore? Leonard nodded. I am certain. A stunned silence followed. Suddenly the entire story sounded different. The coffee, the conversation, the gift, everything people had mocked now carried the weight of truth. Alexander looked at Claire. For days he had searched for flaws in her story. For days he had suspected exaggeration, misunderstanding, or coincidence. Yet she had never changed a single detail. Not once. Claire stood quietly beside the table. No triumph appeared on her face. No satisfaction. Only reflection. She remembered the old man's smile. The way he watched people rushing through the station. The way he said that kindness was becoming rare. Leonard carefully folded the paper again. Miss Bennet, he said softly. Most collectors spend their entire lives searching for something this extraordinary. Claire glanced down at the watch resting on the white cloth. Then she shook her head gently. I was never looking for anything extraordinary. And somehow that answer left the room even quieter than before. The revelation spread far beyond the walls of Hawthorne House before the evening was over. Collectors began making calls. Historians requested photographs. Experts asked to examine the handwriting. Within hours, multiple independent authorities confirmed the same conclusion. The signature was authentic. The paper matched the period. The hidden compartment matched techniques William Whitmore had occasionally used in private commissions. Every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. Claire Bennet had told the truth. She had told the truth from the beginning. Yet the confirmation brought her no sense of victory. Standing near the window, she watched rain begin to fall outside. Tiny droplets slid down the glass, reflecting the city lights below. Behind her, conversations continued in hushed voices. The mood had changed completely. Earlier that week, people had smiled politely while doubting her. Some had openly laughed. Others had treated her story as entertainment. Now the same people spoke with caution. Respect had quietly replaced skepticism. Daniel Mercer approached first. The restaurant manager looked uncomfortable, a man searching for the right words and finding none. Finally, he cleared his throat. Claire, I owe you an apology. She turned toward him. Daniel lowered his eyes briefly. I should have trusted your honesty instead of worrying about appearances. Claire studied him for a moment, then offered a small smile. Thank you. There was no bitterness in her voice. No accusation. Somehow that made the apology feel even heavier. One by one, others followed. Customers, collectors, employees. People who had doubted her story now admitted they had been wrong. Some apologized directly. Others simply nodded respectfully whenever they passed. Across the room, Alexander Hayes remained silent. He had spent most of his life evaluating people quickly. It was one of the skills that helped him build his company. He believed he could identify character within minutes. Yet standing there, he realized how completely he had misjudged Claire Bennet. Not because she had deceived him, because he had allowed assumptions to fill the spaces where understanding should have been. Eventually, he walked toward her. The restaurant had grown quieter again. Most guests were preparing to leave. Leonard Fisher carefully packed away his tools. The silver watch rested on the table between them. Alexander stopped a few feet away. You never changed your story, he said. Claire looked at him. There was nothing to change. Alexander gave a small laugh, though there was no humor in it. Only admiration. Most people would have tried harder to convince everyone. Claire glanced toward the watch. The polished case reflected the chandelier light in a soft silver glow. The truth does not become stronger because people believe it, she said. And it does not become weaker because they do not. Alexander found himself speechless. Around them, the final guests drifted toward the exits. Outside, rain continued falling across Manhattan. Inside, the watch rested quietly between them, having done exactly what its owner intended years ago. It had revealed character. Not only Claire's, everyone else's as well. 3 days later, the auction hall stood once again beneath bright lights and quiet anticipation. This time, however, Claire Bennett was not standing alone at the center of the room. She stood beside Leonard Fisher and several representatives from the Whitmore Foundation, all of whom had spent days verifying every detail surrounding the watch and the hidden letter. The conclusion was unanimous. The watch was authentic. The message was authentic. And the story that so many people had dismissed was authentic as well. Yet the moment Claire remembered most was not the applause that followed the announcement. It was something much smaller. Earlier that morning, before the event began, she had visited Grand Central Terminal. The same station. The same bench near track 31. The rain was gone now. Sunlight spilled through the massive windows, filling the terminal with warm gold. Travelers hurried past carrying coffee cups and rolling suitcases, just as they always had. Claire sat quietly for several minutes. Not because she expected to see William Whitmore again. She knew that chapter had already ended. She came because she finally understood what he had given her. It was never about the watch. It was never about rarity, value, or history. The watch had simply been a vessel. A reminder. Proof that small acts of kindness travel farther than we imagine. 5 years earlier, she had offered a cup of coffee to a stranger because he looked lonely. Nothing more. She had expected nothing in return. And yet that simple moment had echoed through time, touching lives she would never fully know. Back at the auction hall, Leonard returned the watch to her. "It belongs with you," he said. Claire looked down at the familiar silver case resting in her hands. The scratches, the worn leather strap, the tiny imperfections earned through years of use. It felt exactly the same as it always had. Only now everyone else saw it differently. Alexander Hayes approached as the crowd slowly dispersed. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Alexander smiled. "I spent most of my life believing success came from making the right decisions." Claire listened quietly. "Now," she asked. Alexander glanced toward the watch, then toward the people leaving the hall. "Now I think it comes from seeing the right people." Claire smiled. The kind of smile that carried no triumph, no resentment, only peace. Outside, Manhattan moved forward as it always did. Taxis filled the streets. Lights flickered across office towers. Somewhere, strangers passed one another without noticing. Somewhere else, someone stopped. Someone listened. Someone chose kindness over convenience. And perhaps that was the real legacy William Whitmore hoped to leave behind. Not a watch, not a name. A reminder that character reveals itself when there is nothing to gain. As Claire stepped into the evening air, the silver watch rested quietly against her wrist. Not as proof that she had been right, but as proof that truth never needed defending. It only needed time. And if this story stayed with you, perhaps it is because all of us have known what it feels like to be doubted, misunderstood, or overlooked. If that is true, share your thoughts below. We would love to hear your story. And if you believe kindness still matters in a world that moves too fast, consider subscribing for more stories that remind us why the quietest people often leave the deepest mark. Time remembers what people forget.